The house was already warm before the sun fully rose. Soft amber light slipped through the kitchen blinds, touching the wooden table, resting on a folded dish towel near the sink. It was an ordinary Saturday. No rush. No alarms. Just the slow comfort of a family waking up together. Coffee brewed gently. Upstairs, a door opened, then closed. A child's quiet footsteps padded across the hallway. She stood at the kitchen counter, fingers wrapped around a warm mug. Breathing in steam, trying to steady the quiet ache she hadn't spoken about in weeks. The house had felt slightly too quiet lately. Not empty. Just unfinished. And that was why, 3 days ago, she had walked into the local shelter. She hadn't planned on adopting a senior dog. She told herself she was just looking. But then she saw him. Gray around the muzzle. Fur slightly thinner along his back. Eyes deep, not tired, just thoughtful. He hadn't barked. Hadn't jumped. Hadn't tried to impress anyone. He simply watched her. Calm. Present. As if he already understood something about her she hadn't said aloud. The volunteer had smiled gently. He's older, she said. Very gentle. Observant. Loves being near people. Near people. That mattered. Because what she wanted wasn't noise. It was presence. And so now, 3 days later, he stood quietly in the kitchen doorway. Watching her. His name was Winston. She hadn't changed it. It felt dignified. Strong. He didn't rush forward for breakfast. Didn't paw at her leg. He simply walked to a patch of sunlight on the floor and sat down in it. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone who understood how to conserve energy. You want to go outside, Winston? She asked softly. His ears lifted slightly. Not excitement. Just acknowledgement. Her husband entered the kitchen, adjusting his glasses. So, he said quietly, glancing at the dog. How was the night? She smiled faintly. Peaceful. It was true. Winston hadn't made a sound. He hadn't wandered. He hadn't seemed confused. He had chosen one spot near the hallway, and stayed there. Not sleeping deeply. Just resting. Watching. Her youngest came down the stairs next, hair messy, still half dreaming. Is he still here? The little boy asked. Winston's tail thumped once against the floor. Not wildly. Just enough. I think that means yes, she said with a small laugh. The boy approached slowly. He had been unsure at first, cautious about the dog's age. But Winston lowered his head gently, meeting him halfway. No sudden movement. Just softness. The boy placed a small hand on the dog's head. Winston closed his eyes for a second. As if sealing a quiet promise. Later that morning, sunlight filled the living room. Cartoons murmured in the background. Her husband read the news on his tablet. She folded laundry on the couch. And Winston did something she hadn't expected. He didn't settle near her. He didn't lie by the couch. Instead, he walked slowly down the hallway. Past the bathroom. Past the guest room. And stopped near the door of her daughter's bedroom. He sat there. Still. Not facing the door. Facing the hallway. Watching. At first, she assumed he was simply exploring. Learning the house. But 10 minutes passed. Then 15. He didn't move. Her daughter stepped out of her room, nearly bumping into him. Oh, she whispered. Hi, Winston. He stood gently. Moved aside. Let her pass. Then. He returned to the same spot. And sat again. Her husband noticed it too. He's got a favorite place already? She shrugged lightly. Maybe. But something about it didn't feel random. There was no anxiety in him. No pacing. No restlessness. Just focus. Later that afternoon, while the children played outside, she opened the back door to let in fresh air. Winston walked over slowly. Stopped at the threshold. Looked out. Then looked back at her. Not confused. Not hesitant. Just measuring something. "You okay, old boy?" she murmured. He stepped outside, walked along the fence line, then paused near the corner of the yard. Stood there. Nose slightly lifted. Breathing in. Holding still. The breeze was light. Warm. Nothing unusual. No loud noises. No neighbors nearby. Just a normal suburban afternoon. And yet, he didn't relax. He scanned. Not urgently. Not fearfully. Just attentively. She felt it again, that small pull in her chest. That whisper of curiosity. Winston wasn't adjusting. He was observing. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, the house glowed with soft lamplight. Laughter bounced gently off the walls. Plates clinked. Her daughter described a school project. Her son interrupted with excitement. Her husband smiled at the noise. And Winston lay near the table. Quiet. Peaceful. Until suddenly, he stood. Slowly. He walked toward the hallway again. Paused. Looked back at her. Their eyes met. Held. Then he turned his gaze toward the ceiling. Just for a second. Before returning to that same hallway spot. And sitting. Still. Her fork hovered midair. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Her husband glanced up. "He just likes that hallway, I guess." Maybe. But this time, it felt deliberate. After dinner, she walked down the hallway toward him. Knelt beside him. Ran her fingers gently through his fur. "What is it, Winston?" He didn't respond with movement. He didn't whine. Didn't bark. He simply leaned slightly into her hand. Then shifted his eyes upward again. Briefly. Almost thoughtfully. She followed his gaze. The ceiling looked normal. White. Unchanged. The air felt the same. Calm. And yet, he stayed there. Watching. Protective, almost. As if standing quiet guard. That night, after everyone went to bed, she walked out one last time to check the locks. The hallway light was dim. Soft. And Winston was already there? In the same place. Sitting. Not sleeping. Waiting. She crouched again. "You don't have to protect us," she whispered gently. His tail moved once. Slowly. He didn't look tired. He looked purposeful. Connected. As if something inside him had chosen this family. Not for comfort. But for meaning. She brushed her fingers over his gray muzzle. "You're a good boy," she murmured. And for the first time, he rested his head lightly against her knee. Not seeking reassurance. Offering it. In that quiet hallway. Under soft golden light. She felt something settle in her heart. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random behavior. Winston wasn't confused. He wasn't wandering. He was aware. And whatever he sensed wasn't about himself. It was about them. She didn't know it yet. But his quiet watching had a meaning no one expected. Morning arrived slowly. A pale blue light rested against the hallway walls, cooler than yesterday's golden glow. The house stretched awake one room at a time. Coffee brewed again. Toast popped softly. Water ran in the upstairs bathroom. Winston was already in position. The hallway. Same spot. Same posture. Sitting tall, but relaxed. Not stiff. Not anxious. Just present. She noticed it before she said good morning. "You like that place, don't you?" she asked gently. His ears flicked. His eyes met hers. Then, slowly, he looked upward. Toward the ceiling. Just for a second. Her smile faded slightly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't frightening. It was simply intentional. Her husband walked by, tying his tie. "He's guarding the hallway again?" "Maybe," she said quietly. "But guarding what?" He shrugged. "Old dogs have quirks." "Maybe." But Winston didn't feel quirky. He felt deliberate. Later that morning, sunlight filled the living room again. Warm. Comforting. Her daughter practiced reading out loud on the couch. Her son built something complicated out of blocks on the rug. Winston lay near them. Calm. Breathing slow. But every few minutes, his eyes shifted. Not toward the children. Not toward the door. Toward the hallway. Listening. She watched him from the kitchen doorway. Studying the pattern. It wasn't random. He wasn't distracted. He was checking. Monitoring. Like someone waiting for a subtle signal. Around noon, she decided to test something. She walked down the hallway alone. Stopped at the exact place he favored. Looked around carefully. Walls were clean. No cracks. No stains. The air smelled normal. Nothing unusual. She even placed her hand lightly against the ceiling. Cool drywall. Still. Quiet. Winston joined her a moment later. Not rushed. Just steady. He stood beside her. Then stepped slightly in front of her. Positioning himself between her and the center of the hallway. She froze. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't protective in a tense way. It was gentle. But firm. "Winston," she whispered. He lifted his nose. Inhaled slowly. Held still. Then looked at her again. His expression didn't change. But something in his stillness spoke. Pay attention. That evening, her daughter noticed it too. "Mom, why does Winston sit there every night?" "I'm not sure," she replied softly. "Does he look sad?" her daughter asked. She looked carefully. No. He didn't look sad. He looked focused. "I think he's thinking," she answered. Her daughter giggled. "Dogs don't think like that." Winston's tail moved once, as if politely disagreeing. After dinner, she sat beside him in the hallway. The house glowed with lamplight again. Soft shadows along the baseboards. Her husband washed dishes in the kitchen. Water running gently. She placed her hand on Winston's back. Felt the rise and fall of his breathing. "You can relax," she murmured. "We're okay." He leaned slightly into her touch. But he didn't leave. He didn't lie down fully. He remained upright. Alert. Not tense. just attentive. She followed his gaze again. Upward. Always upward. The ceiling above the hallway led toward the attic space. An old house. Built decades ago. Nothing fancy. But solid. At least, she thought it was solid. A faint memory brushed her mind. Last winter, there had been a small issue with insulation. Nothing serious. Fixed quickly. She had forgotten about it. But Winston hadn't forgotten something. He didn't know about insulation. He didn't understand house repairs. But he understood shifts. Subtle changes. Sounds humans tune out. Tiny vibrations in the quiet. That night, as the family settled into bed, the house grew very still. No television. No dishes. No footsteps. Just breathing. And distant wind brushing against the siding. She stepped into the hallway one last time. And there he was. Sitting. Watching. Not tired. Not restless. Just present. She crouched again. "What do you hear?" she whispered. His ears twitched. Very slightly. Almost imperceptible. She held her breath. Listened. At first, nothing. Then, maybe it was imagination. Maybe not. A faint, almost hollow sound. Soft. Like something shifting lightly above. She frowned. It stopped quickly. The house returned to silence. She exhaled. "You're hearing something, aren't you?" Winston didn't move. But his eyes softened. As if relieved she was finally asking. She stood slowly. Walked toward the small attic access panel at the end of the hallway ceiling. It had always been there. Blending in. Unnoticed. She stared at it for a long moment. Nothing visible. No cracks. No discoloration. Still. Winston stood now. Beside her. Close. His shoulder brushing her leg. Steady. Connected. Not afraid. Not urgent. Just certain. She reached up gently, touching the edge of the panel. It felt secure. Solid. Normal. She lowered her hand. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe this was simply an old dog choosing a favorite spot. But as she turned to walk back toward her bedroom, Winston didn't follow immediately. He stayed. Looking up. Holding his position. As if reminding her. This matters. She paused at her bedroom door. Looked back at him. The hallway light cast a soft glow around his gray fur. He looked smaller there. Older. Yet somehow, stronger than before. Not in body. But in purpose. She felt it clearly now. This wasn't habit. It wasn't coincidence. He wasn't guarding a space. He was guiding her attention. Something subtle. Something quiet. Something easy to miss. And whatever it was, he trusted her to see it. She whispered into the still hallway. "I'm listening." Winston finally lay down. Not fully relaxed. But satisfied, for now. As if the first step had been taken. The gentle mystery was no longer just curiosity. It was awareness. And the more she watched him, the more she realized. He wasn't just living out his final years in comfort. He was here for a reason. And that reason was slowly unfolding, one quiet night at a time. The next morning felt different. Not because the house had changed, but because she had. Curiosity had replaced comfort. She moved slower through her routine, listening more carefully to the sounds she used to ignore. The hum of the heater. The soft ticking inside the walls. The faint creak of settling wood. Winston was already in the hallway. Waiting. He didn't look restless. He looked patient. As if he knew she would eventually join him there. She set her coffee down and walked toward him without saying a word. He glanced at her once, then lifted his gaze upward again. The attic panel. Always the attic panel. You really want me to notice that, don't you? She whispered. His tail moved once across the floor. Slow. Certain. She stood beneath the panel longer this time. The ceiling seemed ordinary, painted the same soft white as the rest of the house. No stains. No sagging. But houses had quiet lives of their own. She remembered that now. Later that afternoon, she called a local handyman her neighbor had recommended. Not because she believed something was terribly wrong, but because Winston's steady focus wouldn't leave her mind. Her husband raised an eyebrow when she mentioned it. You think something's wrong up there? I don't know, she admitted. But he's not reacting randomly. He looked down the hallway where Winston sat, calm as ever. It's probably nothing. Probably, she agreed softly. But probably wasn't enough anymore. That evening, while the children finished homework at the kitchen table, she sat on the hallway floor beside Winston again. The warm lamplight cast a gentle glow along the baseboards. You've been trying to tell me something, she said quietly. He leaned into her shoulder. His breathing steady. Comforting. She closed her eyes for a moment and simply listened. At first, silence. Then there it was again. A faint sound. So subtle she might have missed it before. A soft shifting, like something adjusting above the ceiling beams. Not loud. Not crashing. Just movement. She opened her eyes. Winston was already looking up. He had heard it first. Of course he had. You hear that every night, don't you? She asked. His ears tilted slightly forward. Confirmation without words. The handyman arrived the next afternoon. Kind. Middle-aged. Practical. He carried a small ladder into the hallway and glanced up at the attic panel. Probably just normal settling, he said casually. But Winston stood beside the ladder. Watching closely. Not barking. Not pacing. Just focused. The man opened the panel and climbed halfway into the attic space with a flashlight. Dust particles drifted down through the beam of light. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then his tone changed. Well, he murmured. That's interesting. Her heart tightened, not in fear, just anticipation. What is it? There's a section of wood up here that's weakened more than it should be. Looks like slow moisture damage. Nothing dramatic yet, but it's spreading. She felt a chill despite the warm house. Spreading? He nodded. If left alone, it could eventually compromise part of the ceiling structure. Especially above this hallway. Her eyes slowly moved to Winston. He hadn't taken his gaze off the opening. He's been sitting here every day, she said quietly. The handyman gave a small smile. Dogs pick up on things we can't. Changes in sound. Tiny shifts in material. He climbed down and closed the panel gently. It's fixable. And you caught it early. Early. Because of him. She knelt immediately, wrapping her arms around Winston's neck. His fur felt warm against her cheek. You knew, she whispered. His tail thumped softly against the floor. Not proud. Not dramatic. Just satisfied. That evening, the family gathered in the hallway together. Her husband stared up at the ceiling. So if we hadn't checked? It would have gotten worse, she said calmly. Over time. Her daughter knelt beside Winston. He was protecting us? Winston licked her hand gently. Her husband exhaled slowly. Guess he chose the right house. She smiled at that. Or maybe they were the ones chosen. Over the next few days, repairs began. Nothing chaotic. Nothing frightening. Just careful reinforcement. New beams. Fresh insulation. Strength restored quietly above their heads. Winston continued sitting in the hallway during the process. Watching. Supervising. As if ensuring the work was done properly. Each time a tool tapped lightly against wood above, he listened. Not tense, just aware. And when the final repairs were completed, he did something new. That evening, instead of sitting beneath the attic panel, Winston walked slowly into the living room. He circled once, then lowered himself onto the rug near the couch. Fully relaxed. For the first time since arriving, he slept deeply. Not half alert. Not watching. Resting. She noticed immediately. Her husband noticed too. He moved, he said softly. She nodded. He's done. Winston's breathing was slow and steady, his body no longer angled toward the hallway. The position he had held for days had been released. She felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. Not sadness. Gratitude. This senior dog, this quiet soul, had entered their home not just to be loved, but to give something first. His intuition had caught what they couldn't. His patience had bought them time. And his calm persistence had protected the very roof over their children's heads. She ran her fingers gently along his back. You can rest now, she whispered. His ear twitched lightly. Outside, the evening sky softened into shades of lavender and gold. Inside, the house felt stronger. Safer. Whole. And Winston, finally, looked at peace. But as she watched him sleep, a new thought settled gently into her heart. If he had been sent here for that reason, if that had been his purpose, then what else might he still be quietly holding inside? Because something told her. The hallway had only been the beginning. The house felt different after the repairs. Stronger. Quieter. As if something fragile had been gently restored above their heads and inside their hearts. Winston no longer stationed himself in the hallway. The spot beneath the attic panel remained empty now. And somehow, that emptiness felt like proof. Proof that he had done what he came to do. But instead of returning to some distant corner of the house, Winston began choosing places closer to her. Not hovering. Not dependent. Just near. On Monday morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows in long golden stripes. She stood at the counter slicing fruit for the kids' lunches. Winston lay beside the island. Not asleep. Watching her hands move. You don't have to supervise me anymore, she teased softly. His tail brushed the floor once. Slow. He shifted slightly closer. Not for food. For presence. The children began treating him differently too. Before, they had been gentle, cautious around his age. Now there was admiration in their touch. Her daughter braided a small ribbon loosely around his collar one afternoon. You're our hero, she whispered against his ear. Winston didn't react dramatically. He simply leaned into her knee, allowing the affection. Her son started reading to him every evening. Sitting cross-legged on the carpet, book open wide. And then the night saved the village, he would read proudly. Winston's eyes would rest on the boy's face. Steady. Encouraging. As if reminding him that bravery wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was patient. Sometimes it sat quietly in hallways. One evening, after dinner, she found herself alone on the back porch with Winston. The air was warm. Summer settling in. Crickets beginning their soft chorus. She lowered herself into the porch chair, exhaling slowly. The past year had carried more weight than she often admitted. Financial stress. Unspoken worries. Moments of quiet doubt about whether she was holding everything together as well as she appeared to be. Winston walked over slowly and placed his head gently against her knee. No whining. No demand. Just contact. She rested her hand on his head. "You always know, don't you?" she murmured. His breathing remained calm. Steady. She closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, her thoughts slowed. Not because her problems disappeared, but because something steady was beside her, anchoring her. She realized then that Winston's gift hadn't ended with the hallway. It had shifted. From protection of the house to protection of her heart. The veterinarian appointment came midweek. Routine checkup. She had expected the usual comments about age and stiffness. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm blankets. Winston sat patiently beside her in the waiting room. Watching people. Observing. The vet smiled gently after the exam. "He's older," she said carefully. "But comfortable. You're giving him a very peaceful environment." Peaceful. That word mattered. "How long do you think?" she asked quietly. The vet didn't give an exact timeline. Just a look. A compassionate one. "He's in his senior season," she said softly. "Focus on comfort. On connection." Connection. She nodded. She already understood. On the drive home, Winston rested his head against the car door, watching the trees blur past. She reached over briefly, touching his shoulder at a stoplight. "Thank you," she whispered. "For the attic. For the hallway. For choosing us." He didn't move, but his tail tapped lightly against the seat. Days passed gently. The rhythm of the house softened around him. He moved slower now, taking careful steps across hardwood floors, pausing halfway up the small porch step before lifting his back leg. But his eyes remained clear. Alert. Thoughtful. One afternoon, as she folded laundry in the bedroom, Winston stood in the doorway, watching her again. Not the hallway this time. Her. She looked up. Smiled. "Am I being inspected?" He walked into the room, stopped beside the bed, and then, carefully, lay down. Closer than usual. She sat beside him on the floor, running her fingers through the gray fur along his neck. "You don't have to watch everything anymore," she said softly. "You've done enough." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. And there was something in his gaze she hadn't seen before. Not urgency. Not warning. Something deeper. As if measuring time. She felt it too. The quiet awareness that their days were precious. Not endless, but meaningful. That night, the family gathered in the living room. No television. Just soft music playing in the background. Winston lay in the center of them, each person touching him in some small way. A hand on his back. Fingers brushing his paw. A gentle stroke behind his ear. He sighed deeply. Content. Protected. Loved. Her husband looked at her across the room. "He changed this house," he said quietly. She nodded. He did. But what she didn't say aloud was this. He was still changing it. Still teaching them. About attentiveness. About quiet action. About how love didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived older. Gray around the muzzle. Carrying wisdom in silent eyes. As the evening light dimmed into soft blue shadows, Winston slowly lifted himself and walked to the center of the living room rug. He turned once, lowered himself carefully, and rested his chin on his paws. Fully relaxed. She watched his breathing slow, deepen, peaceful. But something in her chest stirred gently. A subtle shift. The kind that comes before understanding something larger. He had protected their home. He had anchored their hearts. And now it felt like he was preparing for something else. Not with fear, not with urgency, but with quiet acceptance. She didn't know what it was yet, but she felt it. The next chapter of his purpose was approaching, and this time, it wouldn't be about beams or ceilings. It would be about something far more tender. The shift began quietly. Not with a sound from the ceiling. Not with a change in the walls. But with her. It was a Wednesday afternoon, warm light spilling through the living room windows. The children were at school. The house rested in that rare midday stillness. She sat at the dining table with a stack of unopened mail. Bills. School notices. Insurance paperwork. Ordinary things. But lately, they felt heavier than paper. Winston lay a few feet away. Watching her. Not sleeping. Watching. She rubbed her temples gently. Numbers blurred together. Expenses had been tighter than she admitted out loud. The attic repair had dipped into savings. Her husband had been working longer hours. She hadn't told him how much it worried her. She didn't want to add more weight to his shoulders. Winston stood slowly, walked toward her, and placed his chin lightly on her knee. She exhaled through a small laugh. "You too, huh?" He didn't move. Just stayed there. Grounded. She stroked behind his ear. "I'm fine," she whispered. But the word fell thin. Winston lifted his head and did something new. He walked toward the hallway. Stopped. Then looked back at her. Not at the ceiling this time. At her. She frowned slightly. "We fixed it, remember?" He didn't budge. Just waited. She hesitated, then stood. Followed him. He walked past the old attic spot. Past the bedrooms. Toward the small linen closet near the end of the hall. A place he had never shown interest in before. He stopped in front of it. Sat down. Looked up at her. Curious now, she opened the closet door. Blankets. Towels. A storage bin on the top shelf. Nothing unusual. Winston remained still. Eyes steady. She reached up and pulled down the storage bin. Inside were old folders. Documents she hadn't looked at in years. Home warranty papers. Insurance copies. Maintenance records. She blinked. She had completely forgotten about the extended structural warranty they had purchased when they bought the house. Her pulse quickened slightly. Not in fear. In realization. She flipped through the folder quickly. There it was. Coverage for specific structural repairs. Including attic-related damage. She sank down onto the hallway floor. "You're kidding me," she whispered. Winston stepped closer. His tail brushed the carpet once. Slow. Sure. She hadn't filed a claim. She hadn't even remembered this existed. The repair had already been paid out of pocket. But the warranty timeline was still active. She looked at Winston, eyes filling. "You brought me here?" He leaned into her shoulder gently. Steady. Connected. Later that evening, she explained everything to her husband at the kitchen table. "You're saying we might get reimbursed?" She nodded. "I completely forgot about it." He led me straight to the folder. Her husband glanced down the hallway where Winston now rested peacefully. "You think he knew about insurance paperwork too?" he teased gently. She smiled. "No." "But he knew I was carrying something." Her husband grew quiet. He understood that part. The next week moved carefully. Phone calls were made. Paperwork submitted. The warranty company reviewed the repair documentation. Through it all, Winston stayed close to her. If she sat at the table making calls, he lay beneath her chair. If she walked outside for fresh air, he followed slowly. Not because he needed exercise. Because she needed steadiness. One afternoon, after a long hold with customer service, she ended the call with a deep breath. "It's under review," she murmured. Winston rested his head on her foot. Present. Days later, the email arrived. Approved. Full reimbursement for the covered portion of the repair. She stared at the screen. Relief flooded her chest so quickly it almost made her lightheaded. It wasn't just about money. It was about breathing again. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Winston," she whispered. He lifted his head from the rug. Watching her. She slid to the floor beside him, wrapping her arms gently around his neck. "You did it again," she murmured. He didn't react dramatically. No burst of energy. No barking. Just that calm, anchored presence. As if to say, "Of course." That evening, the atmosphere in the house felt lighter. Dinner conversation flowed easily. Her husband laughed more freely. The children sensed it too, even if they didn't know why. After dishes were done, she found herself alone with Winston again in the living room. Golden light from the lamps softened the space. She sat on the rug beside him. "You're not just protecting the house," she said quietly. "You're protecting us." His breathing remained slow. Peaceful. She studied his face carefully. The gray around his muzzle seemed softer in the warm light. His eyes, still clear. Still aware. But perhaps a little more tired. He shifted slightly, laying his head across her lap. She froze. Because this felt different. Not guidance. Not alertness. Just closeness. As if he had completed something. Not urgently. But fully. "You can rest," she whispered again. His eyes fluttered half-closed. Outside, the sky deepened into evening blue. Inside, the house felt whole. The attic secured. The finances steadied. The atmosphere lighter. He had guided them through two unseen cracks. One above their heads. One inside her heart. And he had done it without noise. Without panic. Without drama. Just patience. Just presence. As she stroked his fur, a quiet realization settled over her. Winston wasn't reacting to problems. He was sensing imbalances. And gently guiding them back into harmony. But as she watched him breathe, a new awareness stirred. He was moving slower lately. Resting longer. His walks around the yard shorter. He had completed something important. And perhaps, he knew his time was not measured in years now, but in moments. Precious ones. She leaned down and pressed her forehead gently against his. "Whatever you need," she whispered. His tail moved once. Soft. Assured. The subtle signal had not only strengthened their home, it had strengthened their trust. And now, the bond between them felt deeper than protection. It felt sacred. The mornings grew quieter. Not in a heavy way, but in a softer one. Winston no longer followed her from room to room. He chose one spot near the living room window where sunlight pooled gently across the floor. From there, he could see the yard, the trees, the sky. And her. She brought his bed closer to that window. "You like the light," she whispered. His tail moved faintly. His steps were slower now. More careful. One afternoon, she knelt beside him with a bowl of water. He drank a little, then rested his head against her hand instead. Not weak. Just tired. Her husband sat on the couch, watching quietly. "He's telling us," he said softly. She nodded. Tears didn't fall yet, but they gathered. That evening, the children curled up beside Winston on the rug. Her daughter brushed his fur gently. Her son pressed his cheek against Winston's side. "You're the best dog," he whispered. Winston exhaled deeply. Content. Later, when the house fell still, she lay beside him alone. The lamp cast warm golden light across his gray muzzle. "Thank you," she murmured. "For the house. For the strength. For the calm." His eyes met hers one last time that night. Not asking. Not warning. Just loving. And in that quiet exchange, she understood. He hadn't just saved their family. He had prepared them. To be steady. To be grateful. To let go gently. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale silver light. Quiet. Still. Almost reverent. Winston remained near the window. Breathing slow. Measured. The children moved more gently now. Even their whispers felt careful, as if the house itself understood something sacred was unfolding. She knelt beside him with a warm blanket fresh from the dryer. The faint scent of clean cotton wrapped around them. "I thought you might like this," she said softly. He didn't lift his head fully, but his eyes opened. And when they met hers, there was no confusion in them. Only peace. Her husband sat across the room, elbows resting on his knees. "He's comfortable," he said quietly. She nodded. That mattered most. By afternoon, sunlight streamed across the rug in long golden lines. The entire family gathered close. No television. No phones. Just presence. Her daughter traced gentle circles along Winston's paw. "You stayed," she whispered. "You chose us." Her son leaned close to his ear. "You fixed our house," he said proudly. She swallowed hard at that. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? He had. But the deeper truth was something even more beautiful. Winston hadn't just saved beams in the attic. He had strengthened something unseen. He had shown them how to listen. How to pause. How to notice small shifts before they became cracks. In wood. In finances. In each other. He had quietly woven the family closer together. And now, they were sitting in that closeness. Together. Because of him. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently against his. "You don't have to watch anymore," she whispered. His breathing slowed further. Steady. Soft. The golden light wrapped around his gray fur like a farewell blessing. And in that final stillness, surrounded by the family he had protected, the home he had steadied, the love he had quietly deepened, Winston rested. Peacefully. No struggle. No fear. Just release. Her daughter began to cry softly. Her son held onto her arm. Her husband placed a steady hand on her back, and she kept her hand on Winston's fur. Warm, even as his breathing stilled. He finished what he came to do, her husband murmured. She nodded through tears. Yes. He had. His last act hadn't been dramatic. It hadn't been loud. It had been faithful, purposeful, complete. And the beautiful truth settled gently in her heart. Winston hadn't been given to them at the end of his life. They had been given to him at the end of his purpose. And he had chosen to spend that purpose loving them first. The house felt impossibly still the next morning. Not empty. Just quieter. Sunlight moved slowly across the living room floor, stopping at the place near the window where Winston's bed had been. She hadn't moved it yet. None of them had. Her daughter stood there first, holding the folded blanket from yesterday. Can we keep it here for a little while? She asked softly. Yes, she replied. Her voice steady, gentle, because something inside her was steady now. Not unbroken, but strengthened. They buried Winston beneath a maple tree in the backyard. The same tree he used to watch from the window. The soil was soft from recent watering. Her husband worked carefully. The children placed small stones around the spot. Her son added one of his toy knights beside the marker. For bravery, he whispered. Her daughter tucked the ribbon from his collar into the soil. For love. She knelt last, resting her palm against the earth. Thank you for choosing us, she said quietly. The breeze moved lightly through the branches above. Warm. Almost comforting. Days passed. Then weeks. Life returned to rhythm. School mornings. Dinner conversations. Laundry piles. But something had changed. They listened more. They paused more. When something felt off emotionally or practically, they addressed it gently instead of ignoring it. Small cracks were noticed early. Conversations happened sooner. Gratitude came more easily. One evening, months later, her husband stood in the hallway beneath the attic panel. Still solid, he said with a small smile. She smiled back. Always will be. Because it wasn't just what that had been reinforced. It was trust. Awareness. Connection. Sometimes, in the quiet of late afternoon, she still glanced toward the hallway instinctively, half expecting to see a gray figure sitting there. Watching. Protecting. And instead of sadness, she felt warmth. Winston's presence hadn't left the house. It had settled into it. Into the way her daughter now notices when someone seems upset. Into the way her son listens carefully before reacting. Into the way she and her husband check in with each other before small worries grow too large. He had taught them something lasting. That love isn't always loud. That protection doesn't require strength of body. That purpose can be fulfilled in the gentlest of ways. One evening, as golden light once again filled the living room, her son asked quietly, "Do you think he knew?" She looked toward the maple tree outside. "Yes," she said softly. "I think he knew exactly why he came here." And in that moment, the truth felt complete. A senior dog had walked into their lives without fanfare. Gray. Calm. Observant. He had noticed what they missed. Guided what they overlooked. Strengthened what they didn't realize was fragile. And in his final season, he had saved their entire family. Not with noise. Not with drama. But with presence. With patience. With love. The house stood steady. The family stood closer. And somewhere in the quiet memory of a sunlit hallway, a gentle watcher rested. Forever part of the home he had protected.